r/AskReddit. Deep sea divers. What are your horror stories? Diving the day before a hurricane on a small South Pacific island. Out of nowhere a black and white sea snake, venomous, wrapped itself around my arm. Apparently this happens from time to time before major storms. They can sense it and look for things that are heading towards the shore so that they don't have to put in so much effort to get out of the sea. As soon as I was in the shallows it uncurled and headed up the beach where it hid under a breadfruit tree. I thought I was going to get bitten to death by a snake at sea. Turns out I was just a taxi for a very calm but rather rushed reptile. I once had diarrhea at 100 feet. That sucked. It was amazing how warm it made me at depth, but was a nightmare to clean up. I vomited at my own stench. Or maybe from the flu. Edit. Thank you for awarding one of the most truly horrible experiences of my life. Some say everything happens for a reason. I now like to think I endured that literal shit show. This happened in front of maybe 20 people, so that years later I would be able to entertain a few anonymous strangers. The only scare I've had is some jack out in a yacht cruising through our dive location at full throttle. You could hear the boat coming for a solid minute or two before it flew over our heads. Our boat had a dive flag on it and we had a boy with a dive flag on it. They didn't even slow down. Barracuda, sharks, rays, manatees, dolphins, all cool. Humans are way scarier. Night diving is incredibly creepy. You don't realize how dark the ocean is until you are in it. I don't like closing my eyes in a swimming pool during the day. Duck that night dive shit. I have a couple friends who did night dives for their paddy, cert. Saved someone from drowning while scuba diving. Person had an epileptic seizure at 85 feet of water in a pitch black cavern that I was diving also. I was hovering above just watching the flashlights move about when I noticed one flashlight not moving. I swam down and was met with the other diver with no regulator in their mouth. Eyes open and just on their knees. The diver's buddy was next to them and in complete shock to what was going on and was not assisting whatsoever. 15 years of diving and instructor training came over me like it was second nature. I thought her regulator just came out so I popped mine out and offered it to her. That when I noticed she had done mentally checked out, I popped my number 2 regulator in my mouth and attempted to put my number 1 regulator in her mouth but her teeth were completely clenched. I then pressed the purge button to get air into her mouth and noticed her cheeks moving so I know air was getting in there. That was good enough for me. I then grabbed her under her arm and get the regulator flowing in her mouth and swung to the opening of the cavern and then up over 60 feet to get her to the surface. One on the surface did everything I was trained to do. Inflate BC, dumped her weights, got her on her back and started towing to land. As I'm towing her in she is regurgitating all the water she swallowed and inhaled. It seemed like gallons of water. Got her to land where other divers assisted me in getting all her gear off. She was breathing fine and alive but in shock for a while and slowly came around like nothing happened. We were very lucky that we were only 10 minutes into the dive or for sure we would have both been bent and spending time in a hyperbaric chamber. The crazy thing is she didn't tell anyone she had epilepsy and when we later reviewed her consent form she checked off no to epilepsy. I put myself at risk shooting up to the surface like that but if I came across that situation again I would not hesitate to save someone's life. Free dive to about 160 featuring in Dean's Blue Hole in the Bahamas. It's where a lot of the free diving world records are set. Super neat place. Google a picture. Anyway I'd never really been past 100 feet free diving. But this was the perfect place to do it. No current. There's ropes to keep you straight and allow a slight pull back up. Scary part is that you become pretty strongly negatively buoyant after like 60 feet. So you're basically hauling us down while doing nothing and using very little air. So I'm dazed out a bit feeling good and counting the lines that mark depth and all of a sudden feel pressure like my trachea is going to collapse and wake up and realize I've counted to the line that's around 160 featuring or so. Very scary moment because I wasn't sure if my body could take the depth or if I had gone too far and wouldn't have enough air to get back up, which is a much slower and more air intensive process. I did a shipwreck night dive on New Year's Eve one year, and it was spooky as hell. 80 featuring down. Really small plane. Visibility was obviously not great. I've only done this one night dive. So these slow moving fish would come looming out of the dark. Scarier to me was getting back on the boat, because it got really stormy. You'll be looking up at the ladder, and it had come crashing down right next to you. The waves were crazy. My brother got hit by the ladder, but not too badly, and we all managed to get back okay. I know it's not really what you're looking for, but none of the other stories so far are even close. Not my story, but my parents. They like to scuba dive when traveling and have gone several times over the years. Once they visited Mexico and went diving there before I was born. I'm not sure where they were exactly, but my mom was slightly lower down than my dad and looking at the ocean floor. He was looking up and around. My mom had on a gold necklace that was floating in the water around her. It was a sunny day and a fairly shallow dive, so it was sparkling. From my mom's puff, she was going along having a grand old time looking at the sea critters below, when suddenly my dad grabbed her and started frantically shaking her arm to get her attention. She looked up and a barracuda was directly in front of her, closer than was comfortable and staring intently. Scary teeth on full display. It was focused on the shiny necklace and was just hovering there, transfixed. She slowly moved up her hand to cover the necklace and they slowly and calmly moved away from it and it took off without bothering them anymore. But still pretty unsettling and taught my mom to be a little more aware of her surroundings when diving. I wear heavy prescription lenses and can't wear contact lenses. Halfway through a week-long liveaboard dive trip, someone dropped a tank on my prescription mask and shattered it. I usually had a second set with me, but could not find them and only brought one. Because hey, nothing had ever happened before. I am functionally blind without corrective lenses. I can see colors and that's about it. Starting about 5 inches from my face. I was devastated, but decided to go diving anyway. With my husband as my seeing eye diver, I could see my gauges, so I felt reasonably safe. It was among the most amazing 3 days of diving I've ever had. I saw the colors, shapes, and movement, without being focused on the details. I actually took many of the best underwater photos I'd ever taken. I wasn't worried about focusing on a particular coral or fish. I was looking at the larger color patterns, so it didn't turn out to be the disaster I'd thought it was. My biology teacher told us that she once was swimming in the south of the Philippines because she was trying to find an elusive seahorse and she went quite deep at night when they are more active and she got attacked by a shark and her team got out fast. The next day they found a turtle that was bitten in half, shell included, that was pretty big, and it's supposedly the last time she went diving in that area. Not me, but my brother, and not deep sea. Sorry, he was 18. Part of the dive club at his school. They went on a diving trip. The crew that handled the dive counted heads wrong and halfway through the dive the boat went back to shore without them. So there they were 2 kilometers from shore with their only option to swim back. There were about 5 of them. 2 girls, 3 guys. All of them between 15-18 YO. About halfway through one of the girls couldn't swim anymore and started crying. My brother along with another guy swam with her, dragging her along, making sure she didn't drown. Everyone made it out okay. Worst part, school tried to hide it and had the audacity to suspend my brother from school for catching him with a beer while on the trip. Needless to say, they were in deep shit when it came out. Not sure exactly what happened though. Honestly, the things that really scare me, makes my heart run fast, etc. If my air consumption looks funky suggesting a leak or the current is suddenly fast. Basically anything that could lead to a life-threatening issue due to running out of air. When you're deep, you can't just fly back up and be fine. Hurting reefs. Like honestly, if my hand brushes against one, even dead, or gets super close so the dust unsettles because of the current or something, I feel so guilty. My family got certified while I was in high school. Our last dive was open water. We decided we would do it on vacation. All other dives were in the States in a pool. Wreck dive about 200 yards offshore. Not sure why, but mom's tank went empty way faster than everyone else's while we were out at sea. She didn't realize it until it was less than 5%. We surfaced and started swimming back, but she panicked. She was an experienced swimmer and snorkeler, but she couldn't handle it with the other scuba gear. We whistled for help, and the locals thought we were just being tools. Didn't realize she was struggling. We kept her up and got her back. Finally, about 50 yards out, they realized we were towing in a diver in distress. Everything turned out okay. I haven't been scuba diving since. My brother went on to become a dive master. Sorry, not really a deep sea dive. I'm hardly a deep sea diver. My deepest dive to date is 111. This incident actually happened in about 8 feet of water. Crystal River, Florida. Known for attracting manatees in the winter. They don't let you scuba dive there anymore. And the dive master suggested snorkeling this dive because it was shallow and it scares the manatees off. It was my first set of dives out of certification. I was putting my gear on, damn it. So there's 2 manatees in the immediate area. An older juvenile who was hanging out and loving the attention from the snorkelers. And what we assumed was likely his mother. I had a little disposable underwater camera. As soon as I hit the bottom, the big one approached me. I moved the camera out of my face and she just got closer and closer until she literally grabbed the regulator out of my mouth. Luckily my skills were still very fresh in my mind and I calmly grabbed my octo. But I spent the entire dive trying to get far enough away to get pictures of her. She was a nosy pest. Edit. I do have pictures from that trip, but they are on a CD at my father's house. I will see if I can get my old PC booted up to retrieve them when I'm there on Monday. Diving at Gordon Rocks in the Galapagos. We had hoped to see hammerhead sharks that frequent the area. This is a pinnacle surrounded by deep water and strong currents. Our guide had us hold on to the rocks and wait to see who came by. While we were waiting, a group of 10 reef sharks were circling above us while 2 lager moray eels were popping their heads out a few feet away, opening their mouths letting us know they mean business. Needless to say, I was a bit nervous and burning through my air at a rapid rate. Suddenly a group of dozen hammerhead sharks came into view. We had not really discussed what we would do. The guide motioned for us to follow and the next thing I know we are swimming with the school of sharks. This only lasted a few minutes before they broke away from the group. We began to move into our safety stop zone where currents were pushing us in different directions when I suddenly ran out of air. You don't get much warning when suddenly there is nothing left. So here I am 15 feet or so underwater, unable to reach my partner's secondary air, being forced to surface when I should still be chilling. At least the second time I ran out of air was user error on my wife's part anniversary dive, and I was able to get to the secondary air and get back to the surface safely. Oh, and then there was the time diving Bloody Bay Wall in the Caymans where there is a 5,000 foot drop and my partner was nassed out and kept going deeper, nearly exceeding the recreational limit of 120 featuring or so. If I had not grabbed her, she might still slowly be falling into the abyss. Diving is super fun. Too long didn't read, I fell asleep while diving. The weather had been pretty hot and the water temp was also around 26°C. We'd done a dive and a long swim in the morning. We then headed out for our second dive and the boat dropped us in the wrong spot. So we had to swim against a massive current to get to our intended site. Halfway into the swim I just felt like I needed a nap. And so, I closed my eyes and did exactly that. It felt so peaceful. I immediately dropped down to an even deeper depth and was lucky that one of the guys on the dive turned around at that moment and saw what was happening. He swam as fast as he could towards me and caught me. He asked if I was okay. I said I was and passed out again, this time spitting my reg out and started blowing bubbles. He then went behind me, shoved my reg back in, wrapped his arms around me and took me straight to the surface. He saved my life. I got the bends once. I was careful, followed my charts and my computer, had appropriate depths and surface time, but I didn't drink enough water so I was all out of whack. Felt fine until I got home. Mild headache. Then I woke up and it was just pain in my left arm, elbows, fingers. Couldn't even bend them without bad pain. My headache was intense and I was so dizzy. Called my older, more experienced dive buddy and I got rushed to the hospital. Docs got me hooked up and fluids. Checked my dive logs while the decompression chamber was set up. And then got me in there with a nurse. 8 hours in a tube about the length of a car but as wide as maybe a double bed. I was on oxygen and hooked up to an IV and it was so loud, with all the air rushing in. As soon as I got to depth the pain vanished. It was crazy. I'm fine now obviously, but I wasn't allowed to dive for a month, which sucked, but hey, the dives were pretty great. Only thing that really scares me is lung expansion injuries. So the one time I was freaked out was swimming near a wreck at about 100 feet. I lost perspective and buoyancy control, and suddenly realized I had surfaced about 40 feet in 30s or less. Visions of the bends and a popped lung instantly came to mind and dropped a ton of air from my BC to get back to depth in a hurry. Got a massive squeeze from it in my ears, but it gave me a chance to calm the duck down and get a better sense of where I was and re-establish buoyancy control. Bottom line, the scariest things that can happen while driving is the shit you can do to yourself. I dove the Great Blue Hole of Belize when I was 16. I was 150 feet underwater, and about a total of a dozen bull reef sharks were swimming above and below me in circles. Regardless of all of the sharks, 11 out of 10 coolest experience I've ever had. Not exactly deep, but I was doing my certification dive for my PADI Basic Open Water Diver certification. I was at about 35 feet when my regulator started free flowing. We'd been taught to put our tongues against the roof of our mouth to still breathe in that scenario, and it worked just fine in the 70-degree pool. Unfortunately, I was in a 40-degree lake, the temperature of which adds a bit of stress and anxiety no matter the depth. I was fine until the tongue technique didn't work and I grabbed my backup regulator. When I tried to clear it of water and breathe from the backup yet still managed to suck water, I panicked. Thankfully, it being a certification dive and all, there was a dive master with my little group. I signaled an emergency ascent and he and I shot to the surface. I was in a complete panic like I've never known before or since. I was convinced I was dead. Once we got to the surface, he was smart enough to reach between my flailing arms and inflate my BCD. After a few seconds he was able to calm me down, but I was unable to complete the dive. Every time my face went under the surface, I started having a panic attack. Eventually I pushed through. Before it was said and done, I got my advanced certification, which involved a dive to 110 feet and a number of other challenges. Unfortunately, after that accident, diving gave me pretty bad anxiety and got to a point where pushing through was no longer worth it. It's been a long time since then and I'm not sure how I'd react now. Maybe after all this time I'd enjoy it again. I was diving in the early 90s off the coast of Florida. I had been using a spearfish ineffectually for a few minutes when I heard a strange grinding noise to my right. I turned my head to see an enormous set of barracuda jaws grinding just inches from my face. I still recall the fish's eye rotating around to check me out as if considering it should take a bite or not. The people with the worst stories aren't here to tell the tale. Was doing a boat dive and came up to find 20-foot swells. We just had to chill for a while down under until the boat would calm down and we could actually grab the ladder without getting smashed. I remember seeing the ladder going up and down 6-8 feet at a time. I finally grabbed the rope and climbed up as fast as I could. I hung onto the ladder and the boat crew grabbed my BCD and hauled me out of the water and onto the swim step. Half the divers puked on the way back into port. That was the roughest conditions that I have ever been diving in. I was diving with a mom, her husband, and their son on a night dive. IDK how many dives they've been on, but the mom for some reason decided to just go up without signaling anyone why. She did a thumbs up signal, which means she needs to go up, and when the dive instructor signaled back asking why she just went up, so the guide is trying to get her to come down when a boat comes across and runs her right over. I forget the exact size of the boat, but it was big dual motor. Blood was everywhere and we had to rush out because there were a lot of sharks in the area. She died instantly, I assume. I didn't see much once we surfaced as I was busy vomiting from everything. Edit. I realize I worded this poorly, so I reworded it. Not exactly a horror story, but that one time as we were circling a reef I saw a huge eye that belonged to something buried in a sand. We just looked at each other as I passed by. I can tell it was definitely curious but non-aggressive. Had a weird feeling afterwards. The title alone of this, Nope 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 Nope. It wasn't exactly a deep dive, but it was one of the most terrifying moments of my life. I was on a beach dive with my parents, having swum from the beach out to a small reef and then descending. It was only a few minutes after getting down to the reef that something started going on with my parents. My mother was agitated and clutching her chest. We surfaced and she started spitting up dark liquid and struggling to breathe. Fortunately, it was a busy beach, and after we inflated an emergency buoy, lifeguards rushed out and carried her back to the shore where an ambulance waited. It turned out she'd had swimmer's edema induced by the greater pressure. Things turned out fine, but having a medical emergency underwater in the ocean is especially level of scary. Not mine but my uncle's. My uncle got lost from a group and was beginning to start surfacing when 5 or 6 guys grab him and drag him to a small boat. Turns out he strayed into a very small military installation nearby and didn't realize it. He got grabbed up by some Navy divers. Kinda crazy. My dad was spearfishing and almost lost his hand, scrotum, and leg to a 300-year-old eel. Some quick backstory. Greek island off Carpanthus 30 years ago, there was a myth of a 323-year-old monster eel. For those that don't know, eels die after they mate, so they live to about 7 months. However, if they don't mate, they will live for an eternity and they will just keep growing. And the locals told my dad where it was, and my dad was like, yeah sure, it's just a myth. He dived down in the area where they told him it lived, and after a few dives he saw a ginormous octopus and he thought, oh hell yes, since it was half his height and it was definitely the biggest octopus he had ever caught. So he shot it, went to grab it but it was still alive and latched onto the rock, so it then grabbed his arm and he couldn't swim up. Nowhere tank BTW. So now he had less than a minute of oxygen left and he was stuck down at 18 meters. Not that deep but definitely deep. And so he took out his knife, slashed between and underneath the eyes of the octopus. He also lifted up the flap of skin covering its brains and it died after 5 seconds, and then he grabbed it and started stringing it on his belt above his PP. Well, he looks to his left and he sees a freaking torpedo of an eel screaming towards him. Eels love octopus, and there is a saying, for every 2 octopus, there is 1 eel. To describe the eel to you guys is hard, but I'll try my best. Imagine a mouth the size of a human head. That was the mouth of the eel. My dad estimates it was about 13 inches wide and 7 feet long at least. It swam right up to him, opened its mouth and grabbed onto the octopus and started thrashing at the octopus, and since it was attached to my dad's belt, there was an eel right next to his testicles, hands and legs. He unclipped his belt. He dropped everything. His gun, his stringer, his float line. He just bolted to the surface, spent a few minutes at the surface before making sure it had left his gear, and he swam down to get his gun and whatnot. He never went back there, but on the same island, he almost blacked out too after he stayed down too long chasing after a fish. BTW, if my dad had lost his balls or if he had blacked out, I wouldn't be here, so I thank that eel every night before bed. LMAO. Night dive on the Great Barrier Reef with my partner who was learning to dive. Myself, about 10 years of diving, and a dive master. First night dive for my partner, who had been hearing from the 2 of us about how incredible it is. Night diving is one of those amazing, life-changing experiences, completely different to daytime diving as the sights and sounds of the reef are radically different. Plus, viewing the reef through just the small areas of light from your torches changes how you process the experience. It's exhilarating and incredibly zen at the same time. As we're circling back to the boat, the sharks, who have been standoffish but curious as they usually are, come in and one has an inquisitive bite of the diver master's fins. Never seen or heard of sharks getting this aggressive with divers. So the 3 of us damn near catapulted ourselves out of the water and cut the dive short. Have never been worried about sharks while diving until that moment. Normally, they're more afraid of you than you are of them, but not this time. Whoa, you made it to the end? You're a ducking beast. I'll cut you a deal. Smash like and subscribe for more curated content, bruh. It's free and that's a great price.